Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf samach bet. We're going to continue with the machloket we have between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Hanani ben Gamliel about whether a condition needs to be stated both if this happens, then that, and if this doesn't happen, then that, like the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, as opposed to Rabbi Hanani ben Gamliel, who said that you don't need both sides. And we started with a slew of questions, mostly against Rabbi Hanani ben Gamliel, and we're going to continue those questions today. So at the bottom of Samach Aleph Amud, the last question was, Bishlam ala Rabbi Meir, Hainu dichtiv, pasuk from Yeshayahu, Im tovu shmatem v'gomer, then if you listen to God, then Tuv ha'aretz tochelu, you will eat the good of the land. V'im timanu umeritem, but if you go against God and rebel against Him, then v'gomer, what does it say? Cherev tu'uklu, you will be swallowed by you will be fed a sword. Okay, we're going to talk about what does exactly mean. You're going to be fed a sword. Anyway, that all works out very nicely according to Rabbi Meir. It says, if you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, then that will happen. But Ela Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel lamali. So why did we need it according to him? To which the answer is, it's im tovu tova v'im tmanu lo tova v'lo ra'a. You might have thought, if you listen, it will be good for you. If you don't listen, well, neither good nor bad is going to happen. Kamashmalan, therefore it comes to teach you that no bad will happen. Don't think it'll just be neutral if you don't listen. No, bad things will happen. My cherev tu'uklu, what does it mean you will be fed a sword? What does that mean? Amar Rava, milta galalanita, nahama desare akushe ubatz ubatzale. You're gonna have coarse salt, that's the first thing. Nahama desare akushe is hard barley bread, and you're going to have batzle with onions. Okay, that is what we call eating a sword. It kind of eats out your insides. Damar Maris, we see having said in another place, it says, Pat purani chareva b'melach ub'tzalim kashim laguf kecharavot. If you eat this oven-baked bread that's dried out with salt and onions, that is hard for the body like swords. Okay, and that's what it means, cherev tu'uklu. That was just an aside. Now we're back to our mainstream of questions. This time we're actually going to ask a question of Rabbi Meir. Bishlam ala Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. Hainu dichtiv im lo shachav ishotach v'im lo satit tum'ah tachad ishech hinaki. This is a pasuk by the Sota. If you learned Sota, you might remember. If the man did not sleep with her and you didn't stray from the way, meaning if you didn't cheat on your husband, then hinaki, you will be cleansed. But it doesn't say, the next pasuk, actually, it's a bit of a strange section because it's not so clear. The next pasuk says, Va'ad ki sati tachad ishech, and if you did go against your husband, b'chin nitmei, did you defiled yourself, and somebody else ended up having relations with you, and then it says, and then the Kohen makes her take this oath. Anyway, it never really says right there, at least in that pasuk, what happens to you if you did the other thing. So that seems to support Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. It didn't need to tell you, it was obvious. So, Ela the Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, it should have said, you, instead of hinaki, right, or corresponding to hinaki, you will be cleansed. Then it should have said, right, if you're good, then you'll be, you did the right thing, then you'll be cleansed. And if you're bad, then chinki, you'll be strangled. But it doesn't say that. So how can we explain? Amar Rabbi Tanchum, hinkikti. Hinki is spelled, should say hinaki, which should be spelled hey yud nun kuf yud. But instead of saying hey yud, it says hey, which could be, and it just says hey nun. Now you could read that as chinki, okay, as she will choke. And hey and chet often switch in the land of drashot because they're very similar letters. So then what we're basically saying is that word hinaki, you will be cleansed, is read twice. It's read once as you will be cleansed, and secondly, as connecting to the next pasuk, and you will choke im satit, if you really went against your husband. And there you have both sides, to which the Gemara then says, oh, well, if that's the case, then let's flip it back as a question to Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, because then Bishlam ala Rabbi Meir hainu dichtiv hinaki, it says it without a yud to be referencing also the choking, the strangulation that will happen to her if she really did the bad thing. But Ela, the Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, lama leave it. How are we going to explain it according to Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel? To which the answer, it's necessary for the following. Sakadat hachamina, and this is going to be very similar to what we said in the previous pasuk. Im lo shachav ish hinaki, ve'im shachav lo hinaki ve'lo chinki, eli suga ba'alma. You might have thought, if you didn't do anything wrong, then you'll be cleansed. If you did, then you won't be cleansed. You also won't be strangled. And it's just you did something wrong. Kamash malan, that's why it comes to teach you hinaki without the yud, to teach you chinki, you actually will be strangled, but you'll be strangulated, you'll choke, or however you want to say it. But the point being that in general, in other places, though, you wouldn't need to say it if it was clear. Bishlam Rabbi Meir, continuing on. Now, before we read this next section, before we get to what the Gemara is going to do with the next section, I want to read you the verses because I want to kind of prepare you for what's about to come so that you know what to expect. So the first thing we're going to do is read the first pasuk that we're going to read is a section from the para aduma, the red heifer, where we have these waters that we sprinkle on people when they're impure, and then it allows them to purify themselves, to which it says in Bamidbar, chapter 19, verse 12, Hu yitchatabo bayom hashlishi ubayom hashvi'i. You will be purified with this water on the third day and the seventh day after becoming impure to a dead body. Yital, okay, and then he will become impure. He will be purified through this. And if you don't do this process of cleansing yourself and sprinkling these waters, getting them sprinkled on you on the third day and the seventh day, you will not be impure. You can already see where this is going. This clearly matches Rabbi Meir because they spell everything out. Before we, though, see that in the Gemara, I want to read this other pasuk, which we're going to get to soon. If you skip another 7 verses and you get to verse 19, it says, V'hizaha tahora latameh, so the pure person sprinkles on the impure person by Yom HaShlishi or by Yom HaShvi, on the third day and the seventh day. Well, that already we said, so the Gemara is going to say, why on earth are we saying that twice? And then the pasuk there continues, V'chit o by Yom HaShvi, and then he will be purified. The chateh is kind of like to clean him out on the seventh day, which that's also very obvious. Doesn't it seem obvious if you cleanse them on the third and the seventh day? And then it said yitar already in pasuk in verse 12, it said you'll be pure. Well, you don't need to say again, and he will be pure on the seventh day. So we're going to ask all about all these things as we go on. So the first thing the Gemara says, the obvious, bishlam ala Rabbi Meir. This makes perfect sense according to Rabbi Meir. Hainu dichtiv hu yitchatabo bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi'i yitar. Vim lo yitchata v'gomel, gives you both possibilities and spells out exactly what's going to be. That's based on Rabbi Meir, who says you can't just assume, right? Because you said this will happen, then that will happen. You can assume the opposite, or the inverse is true as well. Ela the Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel lama. What do we need this for Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel? To which the Gemara says it's true. You need it. Why? Sakadata chamina. You might have thought mitzvah has the abba shlishi ubashvi. The mitzvah, the ideal mitzvah, is the third and the seventh. But maybe, normally you don't have to do things twice. Maybe if you did it once, it's enough. So ideally, you should do it twice. But if you did it once, maybe you're already purified anyway, as long as you, let's say, wait the 7 days. But you didn't sprinkle the water on day 7. You only did it on day 3. Maybe it would work. Kamashmaman. That's why they need to tell you it doesn't work. Right? If you don't do it on the 3rd and the 7th, then you won't be pure because you need it both. To which the Gemara now says, but wait, we still have some other things to work out in these verses. So why do you need that other pasuk? You might have thought 3 comes to say, don't do it early, don't do it on day 2, and 7 comes to say, don't do it on day 6. That you would have learned from pasuk, the first pasuk, verse 12. Because you're minimizing, you're cutting out days of purification. But what if you sprinkled on the 3rd day, and then instead of sprinkling on day 7, you actually sprinkled on day 8? Maybe you would think, because you're actually extending the amount of time it takes you to become pure. Maybe it works. To which they say, that's why the pasuk had to tell you, Kamashmalan, that's why the pasuk needed to say specifically that hizat or alatameh, specifically they get sprinkled on day 3 and day 7, not any other days. You do it on day 8, doesn't work. But I told you there were 2 parts of that pasuk that don't make sense. But then we obviously know you become impure on the 7th day. What do you need that for? You need it. Why? You might have thought that this whole thing allows you to eat that the 3 and the 7 is in order to eat kachim, sacrificial meat, things that are higher level sanctity. But truma, maybe just one time would be enough to allow you to eat truma. Because again, you can't eat truma, you can't eat sanctified items if you're impure. But there's a different level. We always know that there's 4th degree impurity, for example, for kachim, and there's only 3rd degree for truma. Since truma is less severe than kachim, maybe you would think that one time would be enough for truma. So that's why it says only on the 7th day and after sprinkling on the 7th day does it work to allow you to eat truma as well. Don't think that it works to get out of truma from only one sprinkling. That's the end of our section. So again, what we did was we brought questions mainly on Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. One question was on Rabbi Meir, which we ended up flipping as a question back onto Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. But all the questions were resolved, and now we're moving to the next mission. We have a very interesting mission here. You betroth a woman. And he says, I was sure you were a bat Kohen, you were from a family of Kohanim. Now I find out you're a Levi. And then I guess he doesn't really want to be married to her because he was very excited that he was betrothed to someone who was a Kohen. Or Livia v'harei Kohenet. Or he says, I thought you were a Levite, and it turns out you're from a family of Kohanim. Or Aniya v'harei Ashira. I thought you were poor, and it turns out you're rich. Or Ashira v'harei Aniya. Or I thought you were rich, and it turns out you're poor. Well, all these cases, harei zo mekudeshet. She's actually betrothed. He cannot claim here what we've seen in other situations. Mekach ta'ut. This was all a mistake. Why not? Mipnei shelo hi ta'ato. Notice the wording. It said he thought that this was the case, but she didn't trick him into believing anything. That's what it means. It wasn't he ta'ato. She didn't make him believe something that wasn't true. For whatever reason, he was mistaken. He didn't do his homework properly. He thought. That's his problem, not hers. She can't claim that she, lied to him. It wasn't the case here. If she had lied, that would be a different story. Now, second case of the mission. This is going to be the case the Gemara is going to deal with. The Gemara really doesn't deal with the first case, but this case we're going to deal with now is somebody says, after I convert. Oh, meaning I'm not Jewish now, but after I convert, I want to be betrothed to you. So he gives her something now, and he says, with this, I'll be betrothed to you as soon as I convert. Or he wants her to convert and says, he's Jewish, she's not yet. He says, this will be your betrothal for after you convert. After I become free. I'm a Canaanite slave. Let's say I'm a man Canaanite slave. And I say, when I'm freed by my master, right here again, he's betrothing a Jewish woman now, on the basis that as soon as he's freed, he will be betrothed to her. Or she's a Canaanite slave, and he says, when you are freed, right, with this, you'll be betrothed to me. Now we get into arayot, forbidden relationships. If she's a married woman, and he says, listen, I want to betrothing you to me as soon as your husband dies. Okay, not clear whether he's on his deathbed or not, but it doesn't really make a difference. Or after your sister dies, because if he married the sister, he's married to the sister, or maybe he divorced the sister, but you can't marry the sister of a woman you were married to unless she dies. If she dies, then you're allowed to actually marry the sister. So he says, as soon as your sister dies, with this, you'll be betrothed to me. Or, last case here in the list, the Yabam, right, the brother died, and now, right, or the husband died, and now the brother's waiting to do Yibum, but they're not going to do Yibum, they're going to do Chalitza. So the this guy wants to marry her. He says, look, you'll be betrothed to me. As soon as the Yabam takes care of Chalitza, you'll be betrothed to me. All of these cases, Eina Mekudeshet. Why is that? Because in none of these cases, you have to be able to betroth her now in order for it to work. And in none of these cases can you betroth her now. Either it's a forbidden relationship, or she's not Jewish, or, right, and there's no Kiddushin if she's not Jewish or he's not Jewish, or, right, so that's the first 4 cases of the conversion or the freeing. Then we have now we have the Yabam, who it's also forbidden until the Yabam does Chalitza. Since the Kiddushin can't take place now, therefore, when he betroths her, it doesn't work. Okay, it's not a betroth. And one who says to his friend, if your wife gives birth to a girl, I will be betrothed. She will be betrothed to me. This is a very weird case, but let's just get beyond the right. It's probably not an actual case. We're just talking theoretic, because if we're talking about, and our main topic is going to be davar shelo bala olam. Can you acquire something that's not yet in existence? Just like, since right now you can't betroth her in the previous case, we said, therefore, the Kiddushin is not valid because the Kiddushin can't exist right now. What if we're doing Kiddushin with someone who doesn't yet exist in the world? So that can't be done. And that's why the classic case here is a woman who's pregnant. Well, it's not something that's in existence in this world yet. So, or it's not even clear, by the way, here that she's pregnant. It just says, if your wife has a baby girl, I want to be betrothed to that girl. That doesn't work. Okay? So, enam mekudeshet also doesn't work. But in my time, eshet chavero me'uberet v'hu kal ubara. Now there's parentheses around this line. Most people don't have this in the Mishnah, but we're going to read it anyway. If, though, the wife was pregnant and it was noticeable that she was pregnant, that's usually after 3 months when she's showing tvarav kayamim. Well, then it can apply. And that means that if she gives birth to a girl, he'll actually be betrothed to her. And this is a fascinating thing, because what it's saying is that the fetus, even though it's not yet in existence, it's enough in existence because it's growing in the mother's womb that we're going to consider this something that already exists in the world. Which, it's all these questions of abortion and pro-life and all that, and how alive is the baby? Is the baby alive or not? There's other sugyot that talk about it. If the mother's life is in danger, then we save the mother by killing the baby because the baby's not really in existence yet. So this sugya seems to show the opposite, that we view the baby as in this world enough to be able to make an acquiring of the baby through Kiddushin. Again, whether this will really happen, it's a ridiculous situation, because how old this man must be already of age, and we're talking about betrothing someone who's not even born yet. It's a bit crazy, but they're really talking here theoretical. What are possibilities, in a legal way? Is a fetus considered part of this world or not? And what they say is, once it's noticeable that she's pregnant, then the fetus is already considered in this world. So now the Gemara is going to start off with a Mishnah in Trumot. It's non hatam. It says in a Mishnah, when it comes to truma, you have to take truma from things that are already detached from the ground. So that means that if I have stuff on my tree and I have some fruits I already picked in my house, I can't say I'm going to take truma from these things in my house and that will cover the things on my tree. Okay? And if you did it, it's invalid, because you can't take from one type on another, and certainly if one type is not obligated in, and you really can't take on mechubar, therefore it shouldn't work. Rav Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Amal, what if he said, perot arugazo tlushim, yu truma perot arugazo mechubarim. The fruits in this area that are detached will be truma for those that are attached, and perot arugazo mechubarim yu truma perot arugazo tlushim, or not and, but or the fruits that are here that are attached will be truma for the fruits that are detached already. But now that's exactly what we just said doesn't work. But he adds one important word. Well, what I'm saying is this will kick in when they become detached. So what you're basically saying is that if you say these fruits that are detached are going to be truma for the ones that are on the tree as soon as they become detached. So basically, I'm taking the truma now. This is like the Kiddushin. I'm doing the Kiddushin now, even though it's only going to apply later. It can't really apply right now, but it will apply later when it gets detached. So it seems exactly identical to our Mishnah. Remember, our Mishnah said if you say when you convert, right, that doesn't work. But Rav Asi wants to know, does it work in the case of truma? And vinit lishu mahu. So when they eventually get detached, what's the law? Do we say, you already took truma on them? To which Rabbi Yochanan answers, Amalei kol shebiyado lav k'mechusar ma'aseh dami. Anything that you can do that's in your control is not considered as if it's missing an action, meaning you can do this because it's so easy to just detach them from the tree, and therefore this actually works. And in fact, there are some people, most people, when they do Trumot Masrot, every time they pick things off their tree in Israel, They bring it into their house. They separate some, a certain amount or a little bit, symbolic really nowadays, and they separate that amount and, for their Trumot Maschal. But according to this, and some people actually do this, you can actually do it once at the beginning of the season and not every time you bring the fruits in, or vegetables. You can do it once in the beginning of the season in this way. And then this is the solution, what Rabbi Yochanan says. Okay, not everybody agrees that this is a good way to do it, but some people actually think it's a very valid way to do it, and based on our sugya. So now we have a big question from our Mishnah, Eitivei. But wait, our Mishnah says, right? Once you convert, or once I convert, or once I get freed, or once you get freed. Right? Or after your husband dies, after your sister dies, or after the Yabam does chalitza. To which the Gemara says a very interesting question. Well, interesting to think what they were thinking when they asked this question. Now, most of these things are not in your control. You're a slave. You don't know when you're going to get free. You don't know when the sister's going to die. You don't know when the Yabam's going to do chalitza. All these things are not really in your control. But elagel have biyado. But if I want to convert, it's in my control. Now, why do I kind of laugh at this? Because it's obviously, we know conversion is a process, and particularly nowadays, it's a whole long process to convert, and it's really not in your control. Part of the difficulty of converting is that you have to go in front of a court and they check whether you really are serious or not, and there might be concern that you're doing this for the wrong reasons, and depending on what kind of beitin you go in front of, it might be actually kind of complicated. Particularly in Israel, it's known to be not a very simple process, and it's certainly not, if you ask anyone who's trying to go through a conversion right now, it's not very much in their control. Obviously, there's things they can do to control the situation, but it's not exactly in their control. But the fact that the Gemara asked this question seems to indicate that conversion looked a little bit different in those days, and that it actually was pretty easy to convert. You decide you want to convert, you convert. Well, the Gemara is going to say it's not exactly true, but I wanted to point out here that clearly it was clearly simpler than it is today, because the fact that they even thought that, you just decide to convert and you can convert. And you'll see the answer that they give, which still doesn't coincide with what we have going on nowadays. So now they say, Girnami lab biyado. Well, to convert is also not fully in your control. To Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ger tzarich shlosha. You need 3 people to convert, meaning you need to do it in front of 3 people. Doesn't need a court, we do nowadays in front of 3 rabbis. You just need 3 people to function as a court to do it. Tosfot, there's an interesting Tosfot, which he actually says, what is it that needs the court? Which part of it? Is it the acceptance of mitzvot? He says it must be the acceptance of mitzvot and not actually going to the mikveh, even though we do have 3 judges, when, like 3 rabbis there, when you go to the mikveh. In fact, there's recent halachic literature being written about whether women can actually do this, because it's very uncomfortable for a woman to be in the mikveh with men. They obviously wear something that covers their body. They're not exposed, but it's an uncomfortable situation, and there's a whole question about it. Is this acceptable or not? But in any case, Tosfot seems to say that the 3 people in the mikveh is not as critical as the 3 people when they accept the mitzvah. That often they do the Kabbalat mitzvah while you're in the mikveh, and that's the reason why you would need the 3. Anyway, it's an interesting Tosfot if you want to try to attempt to read it, but we're going to move on. So now my time, why do they need 3? Because mishpat k'tibe, there's a pasuk that says, Rashi quotes it, mishpat echad yeh lachem kagel ka'ezrach. There's one law for you, also for the ger, also for the ezrach. Here you see mishpat associated with ger, and from that they learn that in order to convert you need mishpat, kidin, like the law where you need 3 people, 3 judges. So therefore, since you need 3 people, how do you know that you're going to get 3 people to be able to convert? It's not in your control, and therefore we have no question from our Mishnah. So when it comes to truma, since it's in your control to detach them, we can view them as if they're detached, right? You can do the separation of the truma now, even though you really can't do it on something attached, because it's in your power to easily detach it. But all these cases in our Mishnah are not in your control to rectify the situation. To which Matkifla Rav Abba bar Mama. Rav Abba bar Mama comes to the question to Rabbi Yochanan and says, "Ela me'ata hanotem pruta l'shifchato." And as he said, if it's all about, can you control the situation? Let's say we have a man who gives a coin, a pruta, which is enough to betroth someone with, to his maidservant, Canaanite maidservant, a slave, and says, "V'amar harei mekudesh li lachar shacharech." You'll be betrothed to me after I free you. Hachanami, the have a Kiddushin. Are you going to say that this counts as Kiddushin? To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. This isn't a good comparison. Hachi hashta. This isn't like the same as pulling fruits off the tree or pulling vegetables out of the ground, because when you pull a vegetable out of the ground, it's the same vegetable. It's just either detached or attached. But here, you're not going to like the language. I'll warn you before I read it, what they say, but I'll get to really what they're saying. And they might not be, in those days, they certainly weren't sensitive to language the way we are nowadays. And it wasn't like they had all the sensitivity to saying things politically correct. So with that, I'll get to the next few words that are tough for me to say. Meikara behema hashtadat acheret. The slave was originally like an animal, and now is its own mind. Okay, it's like a new mind. What does this mean exactly? First of all, why are we calling slaves animals? So first of all, Canaanite slaves, sometimes we do see comparisons that they're like that they're compared to animals. But I think the comparison to animals isn't that we think that they're, they don't, right? One of the main differences between humans and animals is that humans have a brain and animals don't have the same kind of brain as humans do. So we can think in a way that animals can. Now, I don't believe that they're saying slaves can't think in the way that animals can, but I do think that they're saying, especially because they use the language dat acheret. Think about a slave and what a slave mentality is. A slave does not have their own mind, really. They can't decide what they want to do when they want to do it. They're more like an animal in the sense that, number one, they're the possession of the owner, and therefore the owner determines for them what they do every moment of the day. You don't have free choice. Once they get out, they have free choice. So this is what happens is she metamorphosizes into a different being when she's freed. So you can't say that he can do a betrothal of her when she's in a status of a slave, when she doesn't have her own mind and her ability to make decisions, to when she's got dat acheret and she's a different person, she can now make her own decisions. And therefore, the betrothal will not be relevant now for later. First of all, she also has to agree. She might have no choice but to agree when she's a slave, but when she gets freed, she might decide, I don't want to marry you, and marriage has to be done with her agreement. So I think the comparison to the animal is really trying to say they don't get to think on their own. That's how I understand. Ella hada amar Rabbi Yoshaya. Okay, now we have another question against Rabbi Yochanan. What Rabbi Yoshaya says, Hanotem pruta l'ishto v'amar la harei mekudesha li lachar she'agarshech eina mekudesha hachinami leRabbi Yochanan dehavu kiddushin. They're going to say as the following. Rabbi Yoshaya said, if you give a pruta to a woman and you say to her, okay, now you're married to her, it's a little bit weird, and you say to her, here's a pruta. With this, you'll be betrothed to me in the event that I divorce you. Maybe he's trying to tell her, I promise I won't divorce you, and even if I get angry and decide to divorce you, well, you're going to be immediately betrothed to me again. So, according to Rav Oshaya, he says, Eina mekudeshet. This doesn't work. And are you going to say now, Hachinama the Rabbi Yochanan davu Kiddushin? Same thing. It's in his control to divorce her. So theoretically, if Rabbi Yochanan thinks it's in his control, it can work. So here it's in his control, it should work. Nihidis, today they have a very good answer. In fact, the commentaries on this are even more interesting. Nihida biyado legarsha, biyado lekadsha. Just because it's in his power to divorce her, it's not necessarily in his power to remarry her again, because she has to agree. And she might not want to agree after he divorced her. She might say, you know what, thanks, I don't want this to happen again. And therefore, it can't possibly be Kiddushin, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't disagree with Rabbi Yoshaya about that halacha. So the first we brought against Rabbi Yochanan was a question from, what if he says to his slave, when I free you, that's in his control? We said, no, that doesn't work because it should become something different, and that wouldn't work. Or we said, maybe just the second thing we did was say, is it possible he disagrees with Rabbi Yoshaya about this one? And then we said, no, he doesn't. Now we're going to say another thing about Rabbi Yochanan. Tifsho to buy Rav Oshaya. Rav Oshaya asked the following question and didn't have an answer. So couldn't we just bring an answer from Rabbi Yochanan for this question? Hanoten shtei prutot liisha. He gives 2 betroth to one woman. He's not married to her yet. And he says to her, Amar hitkadshili hayom. Sorry, be'echat amar hitkadshili hayom. With one betroth, he says, I want to betroth you with this betroth today. Ube'echat amar la, and with the other one, he says to her, hitkadshili la'achar shagarshech. And if I divorce you in the future, I want to betroth you with this one. Tifshomina delo havu kiddushin. You would say that it's not Kiddushin, right? Now that we just said that even Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't think the previous case was Kiddushin, so this also wouldn't be Kiddushin. And then it should be obvious, this doesn't work. Because again, maybe she won't want to agree to it later. To which the Gemara says, no, Dilma, the dilemma there is maybe, since in the previous case, she was already married to him, so there's no such thing as a betrothal when you're married. In this case, she wasn't betrothed yet to him. She was nothing. So since he's doing 2 betrothals at once, maybe the second betrothal will work on account of the fact that the first betrothal works, or maybe because she's not even betrothed, so there's somewhere for the betrothal to actually land because she's not betrothed, maybe it would work, and that's why it's left as a question. Okay, so we have we kind of tackled Rabbi Yochanan from 3 different directions here, trying to say, would he agree? Would you disagree with these statements? This raises a difficulty, okay? And then, or just, would you be able to answer from what we just said? And in the end, no, you couldn't answer Rabbi Yeshai's question. Tanya kavatei de Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to bring a braita that proves Rabbi Yochanan. Ein tormim min hatalush al mechubar. This is going to be exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said, okay? Ein tormim min hatalush al mechubar v'im taram ein trumato truma. Okay, so that sounds like the Mishnah that we saw from Truma, which is you can't take from something detached on something attached. But if you did, it doesn't work. Ketzad. Amar perot arugazo tlushin yehu truma perot arugazo mechuberet. This is exactly what we saw before. You say fruits of this area will be truma for the fruits in that area that are detached, and that will be on the ones that are attached. Or perot arugazo mechuberet yehu truma perot arugazo tlushin, or the attached ones will become truma for the detached ones. Lo amar klum. And here, in addition to the Mishnah, now we're going to add exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said. This is a braita that has what Rabbi Yochanan said in it already, which means this is an earlier source than Rabbi Yochanan, basically saying what he held. Ava amar l'shu, but if you said when they become detached, vinit l'shu, and then they become detached, varav kayamim, then it actually works. Yeter alken, and furthermore, amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, afilu amar perot arugazo tlushin. You truma perot arugazo mechuberet, and in addition, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, even if you say that again, detached on the attached, or perot arugazo mechuberet, you truma perot arugazo tlushin, or attached to detached. This is just the second part of the braita, and it's an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Lechishiyaviu shlish v'yitalshu. They're barely even grown yet, and you say here when they grow to a third and are detached, then this will kick in, this truma that I'm taking. And if they grow to a third of their growth and they're picked, then dvarav kayamim, it works. Now, what's the problem here? The problem is if they're not even a third grown yet, they're really almost nothing. And this is what we call davar shelo bala olam. You don't even know if it's going to grow to fruits. So amar Rabba lo amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov ela b'shachat aval ba'agam lo. We're going to have 2 versions of a machlokah between Rabba and Rav Yosef. Rabba says, this is only if it's already strong, hard enough that it can be used as animal fodder, and therefore it has to be, when you make this statement, it has to be something of significance, even if it's just for animals, but in order for this to work. Otherwise, it's really davar shelo bala olam because it has no use. Aval ba'agam lo, if it's in that soft stage where in the beginning it grows, it's very soft and kind of bends over and flops over, you can't say this. You can't, it doesn't work. Rav Yosef amar afilu ba'agam. Rav Yosef thinks it even works if it's bent over like an agam. Now, just as an aside, they're going to say, my mashma dehai agam lishana debutzal nahu. How do you know that the word agam that Rav Yosef used is something that's bent over and very, very soft? So they say, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar ka halachof ka'agmon rosho. This is a nevuah in a prophecy of Yeshayahu. He says, will you bend down like the agamon bends its head? And agamon has the root of agam, and therefore they learn from there that agam is growth that basically is very light, loose, kind of flops over. It's an earlier stage. And once we have this machloket, we now say, Keman Azla, who, according to who, is the following Braita, Hadetanya, that it says in a Braita, Ha'omer lechavecho, Im yalda, now we're going to go back to the fetus. Im yalda ishtecha nekeva mekudeshet li, lo amar klum. Right? If your wife gives birth to a female, she'll be betrothed to me. That's nothing, that statement. But Amar Rabbi Chanina, lo shanu ela she'en ishto me'uberet. And here we get to the same that we saw the last line that wasn't really in our Mishnah, but it was kind of appeared there, even though most versions don't have it there. But Rabbi Chanina here says that's only if ein ishto me'uberet, if she's not pregnant. Sorry, here we're just saying pregnant. We didn't say yet about her looking pregnant. But he adds here, it's only if she wasn't pregnant. Aval ishto me'uberet, Rabbi Chanina says if she's pregnant, v'arav kayamim. Now we want to know, who does this fit in with? Rabba Rav Yosef. So Kiman, Ike Rabba Keshu Karubara, Ike Rav Yosef, Afa Pishalohu Karubara. The question between the way Rabba and Rav Yosef would understand Rabbi Chanina is that if she's pregnant, right, it's like this stalk that's growing that hasn't yet grown to a third of its growth. So if you're Rabba who says it's only if it's more solid and it's a shachat, like a animal fodder, then he would say only once she's actually showing. Has to be a later stage really for it to work. Rav Yosef who says even in Nagam, even at the very young ripe stage, we can already call this enough in the world that it works. Then we're going to say then according to Rav Yosef, it's even as long as she's pregnant, that's enough. Doesn't even have to be that she's far enough into her pregnancy that she's showing. That's the first version of the machloket. But Ikeda Amre, second version of the machloket is Amar Rabba, Lo Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Ela b'shachat beit kivsha. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, according to Rabba says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is only talking about fodder that lives on rainwater. Aval b'shachat beit shakya lo, but d'vay shikya. If you have to water it, that doesn't work because maybe it'll never come into existence because it doesn't survive on rainwater alone. Rav Yosef Amar Afilu b'shachat b'shikya. Yosef says even if it's fodder that grows by irrigation, it's fine. It's still enough in this world. Now notice that they both think though it has to be shachat. Nobody here says it could be the earlier stage of an agam. To which the Gemara now says, because this is the second version, so we're going to have the exact same question. According to who is this line about if you say, if your wife gives birth to a female, she'll be betrothed to me, that doesn't work. But Amar Rabbi Chanina lo shanu ela she'en ishto me'uberet. But comes Rabbi Chanina and says that's only if she's not pregnant. Aval ishto me'uberet v'arav kayamim. But if she's pregnant, then it works. Kiman kishu karu bara udivrei hakol. This actually fits according to everybody, but it would have to be not just that she's pregnant, but that actually you can already see that she's pregnant. It would have to be that later stage because both of them think it's shachat. Okay? And then it fits with both Rabba and Rav Yosef. To which Abaye now says, and this is a statement, type of statement that comes up in the Gemara a number of times, and there's particular people who like to say this. One of them is Abaye. Amar Abaye, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rebbe for Rabbi Meir, Kulu Svir Lehu Adam Makneh Davar Shelo Ba'ala Olam. Well, I'm now going to give you three different opinions, three different things that were said by three different rabbis in three different contexts, and I'm going to show you that they all hold this one idea. They all their halachot are based on this concept that a person can acquire something that's not yet in this world. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Hadam Aram, we already saw, because he says, even if, right, it's not even up to a third of its growth yet, you can already acquire it and do Trumot Masrot with it, because it's fine that it's not yet really in existence. Okay, and then we're going to have to see Rabbi and Rabbi Meir in tomorrow's daf. So quick review of today's daf. We started with the continuation of these questions, psukim that seem to support Rabbi Meir against Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel about what kind of tanai you need. Can we assume, if you say one, we know what the opposite or the inverse is going to be or not? Then we answered all the questions, all the difficulties. Then we brought this Mishnah that had a few things. The first was, it's not a mekach ta'ud if you were mistaken about what you thought the woman was. That's not a mistake that you can say, oh, she's not my wife, or not betrothed to me. Then we had these cases where someone betroths a woman for a future state, at a future point, betroths her now, but right now they can't actually be betrothed, but says, but I want to do it. I want it to kick in when it actually works. We said that doesn't work. And then we compared it in the Gemara to the Truma, where it does work if you say at some future point when it gets detached. But we said Rabbi Yochanan distinguished and said that's because it's in his control. This is not, all these cases are not in the person's control. And since they're not in control, therefore it doesn't work. Then we brought some questions about Rabbi Yochanan. Then we brought a Braita to support. In that Braita, we got to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's approach, who said, not only the case that Rabbi Yochanan said, or the case that the Tan and the Braita said, which was the same thing Rabbi Yochanan said, but he adds this case that if it's not even a third of its growth, it works. And then we compare that to the pregnant woman case, and we had two different explanations of Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef and what exactly their disagreement was about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion. But the Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion is really premised on a person can acquire something that's not yet in existence in this world. Okay, because that what's going to grow from that is not in existence yet, even though the item started growing a little bit. And then we're going to discuss tomorrow who the other people who hold this and where do they hold it and where do we see that they seem to agree with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov about this point. With that, wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom or Shabbat Tov.